One of the most frustrating things on the journey of fertility is when you're told we don't know what's wrong. It's unexplained infertility. Just keep trying. It might happen. I remember waking up at about 6 in the morning it was, and I looked outside the window. It was still a little dark, but I could tell that it was raining. It was drizzling. It had been raining all night. And I thought, let me just sleep. I need a few more minutes. So I went back to sleep. Well, not quite, but I wanted to stay in bed. In what seemed like a few minutes, one of my friends comes into my room and she says, "Kambua, are you still sleeping? Bado melala?" So I get up because it was my wedding day. And the day turned out to be so beautiful. In fact, so beautiful. The sun came out, the rain had stopped, and we had a great celebration. And this is what I remember about that day. When I think back now, I feel like when I got married, or when we make that decision to get married, I was fairly young, depending on how you look at it. I was so naive. I remember there was that point where the pastor or the presiding minister called any other pastor who's in the room or in the place to come over and speak a blessing over the couple. So I remember all these ministers coming, some that I knew, some that I didn't know, and they came and they blessed us. And you know, there's that really powerful prayer that's made about how you will prosper in everything that you do, and we said amen, and you will be blessed, amen, you will be blessed with children, amen. It just, in my mind, it seemed so easy. Everything was going to fall into place in the time that I imagined that it would. I'd always been that person who had plans. I made plans. I knew that by the time I graduated from uni, I would wait a little while and then get married. By the time I turned 25, I would have gotten married and probably pregnant with my first baby. But here I was 27, it felt like I was a little off the mark, but still close to what my target had been. So I figured that everything else would now flow from there. Before I turned 30, I would have my firstborn, and then in my early 30s, I'd have the other one, and then, just focus on raising the kids and growing up. I feel as though when I think about those years, it's almost like a chessboard when you have all your pieces so beautifully planned and placed and so strategic, and I'm going to move this so that this can move, and then somebody just comes and wipes the board off and all the pieces fall everywhere, is what the next decade in my life became. And when I had that miscarriage, that first miscarriage, I felt like I was still in that confusion of where are the pieces? Why are they everywhere? Why doesn't anything make sense? Why don't I have control of things the way I imagined I would? Why do people seem to have their lives working out so perfectly, but I'm unable to even make sense of where I am? But even though I had lost that pregnancy, it had stirred up a level of hope in me, because I thought, okay, I have the ability to get pregnant, so maybe, just maybe. And remember, I told you there's a friend of mine who said, God will do it again. I held on to those words. Even when they didn't make sense, I thought, okay, God will do it again. So here I was in the middle of this journey, not knowing which way is forward, which way is backward, looking for answers, Googling everything that I knew to Google, asking everybody that I knew to ask. And in my quest for answers, I remember one time sitting with a friend of mine, and she said, "Kambua, I know a doctor at Aga Khan University. He's very knowledgeable on issues with fertility, and he might be able to help us figure out what is going on with you. So I made an appointment with this doctor. Up until then, I never had fully accepted that maybe there is an issue that needs to be addressed. So I was here and I thought, I have nothing to lose. I will go make the consultation and just see how it goes. So I went to see this doctor. We had a little chat and he basically suggested what he thought the next best steps would be. That was the first time that I heard of the HSG test. I thought to myself, how bad can it be? Probably nothing to worry about. And I asked him because, I'm a bit of a cowgirl, to be very honest. I asked him, how is this? Is it going to be painful? Is it going to be difficult? And he assured me that, you know what, it's going to be fine. It's not a big deal. I honestly think he just downplayed it because he knew that I probably would chicken out if I knew exactly how intense it was going to be. So I remember this day I was prepared for the test. I had taken my antibiotics for the week and went in for the procedure. And I spoke to the nurse who was getting me prepared before the doctor came in. I asked her, is it painful? And I just remember, that look, I tell you, that doctors and nurses have when they don't really want to divulge everything. They don't want to make you panic, but you can tell that there's more than they are saying. So I remember her telling me, Simbaya sana. So I get dressed in those, hospital gowns, and I'm on the table now waiting for the doctor to come. Ideally, this is what an HSG test does. Dye is pushed through your tubes, and they get to see if there's any blockages in your tubes. If it shows as though the dye is not going all the way through your tubes, then there possibly is a blockage, and that way they're able to address the reason why you haven't been able to conceive. So, I was like, okay, that sounds fair enough. So the doctor came in and he began the procedure. It has been many years since, but I still remember how painful, how uncomfortable that test was. And at some point, I just told him, stop, because I couldn't take it anymore. And I was just like, there was so much running through my mind. I was like, do I really have to do this? So he stopped, and then he said, he realized that I was actually, because I told him, I just don't want to do it anymore. He stopped, and I thank him for being compassionate, because he told me, I'm going to give you a minute to catch your breath. You're doing really well. It's gonna take a really short time and we will get exactly what we need to get. So I could see on the screen how the dye was moving, and I thought, okay, I can do this. So he managed to finish the procedure, and we agreed that I would meet in his office in a little while. I remember lying there after he was done, and the nurse said, I'll give you a few minutes if you want to stay here a little while and just, gather yourself. In that moment, I had a mixture of, it felt like defeat. There was a little bit of anger somewhere in me, because I thought, why does this have to be so difficult? I felt alone. I felt like, this thing that is so easy for everybody around me has brought me to this table where I have been traumatized because of a procedure. But I got myself together eventually, and I went back to the doctor's office, and he was in a good mood. He said, you did so well, and here are your results. You see, the dye moved very beautifully through your tubes. There's absolutely nothing wrong with your tubes. So what I would say to you is just go and keep trying. And I remember leaving the hospital, going home, still in quite a bit of discomfort. I went and bought comfort food, went to the house, put on some movies, blacked out on the couch. I felt as though my heart ached just as much as my body did in that moment, because first of all, I had gone for this consult hoping for an answer, a tangible thing, a reason why it's not happening. And one of the most frustrating things on the journey of fertility is when you're told, we don't know what's wrong. It's unexplained infertility. Just keep trying. It might happen. I feel like it's sometimes so much harder than when somebody tells you, this is what the issue is, this is what we can do about it. So after that, I decided I was not going to do any other tests for a while. I needed to just move forward with my life. The months that turned into years were really challenging because I've lived a fairly public life, and even though I was having what should be a private struggle, it also became everybody's business. My womb people were highly invested in my womb and what my womb was doing or not doing. It was in social gatherings, it was on social media, it was on all these spaces, and it almost felt like my world was caving in on me. And I think that even though I kept fighting to find meaning in other things, and I did find a lot of joy in my work, in the ministry, in my music, and in people who loved me, there still was this thing that I couldn't ignore. And even when I tried to ignore it or I tried to forget it, somebody or something would remind me of it. Time went on, and in between, from the time I'd had the miscarriage, was now maybe another 2.5, going to 3 years where nothing had happened. And I started to think about going for another consultation. My family and friends suggested, I got suggestions for outside the country to go and see what my options were. And I was very open. Basically, I was like, I have nothing to lose. Let's see what's going on. So in that process, I was introduced to another doctor, a female doctor who happens to be a fertility specialist here in Nairobi. And I went to see her, told her a little bit about my history, where I was, how I didn't know what was going on. And I remember, I think for the first time in this journey of looking for answers, I met somebody who was so compassionate. It felt like I was speaking to a doctor, but I also had found a safe space. And I remember her saying to me, I know this has been very difficult, but what I want us to do is we're going to start from scratch, as though you've never been tested for anything. We're just going to begin this journey all over again, and we will work with the process of elimination. And that sounded fair enough to me. I did tell her, though, that I had done the HSG test. I did not care to do it again. So what she requested was that I would get the results from the other doctor and bring them to her. And if the duration was still valid, then we would ignore that test at that point. So we did a lot of blood work that had to be sent outside the country. And she told me when I would come back to get the results. And the thing about infertility is that every day is like, it feels like a month. Every month feels like years. Everything just stretches out for so long. So even though I was waiting for results in, I think it was 2 weeks, it felt like I was waiting a lifetime, because I just thought, let's get over and done with it. Tell me how bad it is. I just want to know. I just want to know. And, time is so important, because when you're trying to have a baby, the days matter, what time of the month matters, how your body is feeling matters. Everything counts so much in a way that I never understood before. I remember the many, many times, and they were many, where I was 100% sure that I was pregnant. And I remember the heavy disappointment. I remember the crippling feeling of, I have to start all over again. I failed this time, is what it felt like. I failed this month. I have to try again. And at some point, it becomes a very mechanical process because you just want to fix something. You just want to fix it. So I would show up, I would go to work, I would show up for my family, I would show up for my friends best as I could. But this situation was just breaking me day by day. I remember intentionally pulling back from networks and conversations and communities that I felt were sort of triggering me sometimes. Couples who had gotten married around the same time as we had, who were like on baby number 2, baby number 3, because it just seemed so easy. And infertility feels unfair. That's what it feels like. It's not that you're not happy for people. It's just that you wonder why it's so easy and effortless for everybody else. It triggers you when people complain about their children. And, now that I'm a mom, I get it. I have very difficult days sometimes with my kids. But when you're walking the journey of infertility, you get triggered when someone is complaining about their children. You get triggered when someone is going on and on about their children, because it almost feels like the one thing that you're not able to access is the one thing everybody has, and they don't see the privilege there is in having it. So my social life was affected quite a bit, actually. And the people who are close to me, very close to me, they got it, they understood it, and they held space for me. Some friendships fell through the cracks. And when I look back, are there some things I would have done differently? For sure. Are there conversations I would have had more openly with people who I had given access to my life? Probably. But there's also bridges that burned, and, I'm not looking back at that. But I learned so much about being empathetic and being gracious to people, to myself. I learned how, out of being naive, when people get married, the first thing we ask them a month later is, so when are the kids coming? Or they have one kid and you're like, when are you giving them a playmate? We're so ignorant about infertility. We're ignorant about primary infertility, which is actually a really big thing here in Kenya, here in Africa, where a couple is able to have a child, but they're unable to have a child after that. And we make all sorts of suggestions about how they just want to enjoy their lives. That's why they're refusing to have another child. But you don't know what their story is, what their struggle is. So I became aware to a side of life that I had never imagined. And painful as it was, I'm grateful that I did, because I see life differently. I see it through a very different lens than I did at that time when I was in my late 20s and I was getting married. I went back for my results. It was a beautiful sunny day. Usually a lot of things that have happened in my life that are heavy and painful have happened on very beautiful days. So I went to see her, and I walked into her office, and I just knew, I looked at her and I knew that whatever she had to tell me was not good. So I sat down and tried to do a little small talk, which wasn't quite working. And she said, okay, Kambua, I have your results. And she opened, I remember her opening her folder, and, she was like, this is good, your thyroid gland is good, this is working. And then she just was circling around a certain area. And I remember that motion of her just circling and saying, oh, we have a problem, we have a challenge over here. And, I was like, I still was thinking, how bad can it be? So I remember very technical terms being used, and I kept asking her, what does that mean? Because I really just wanted to understand in a language as simple as I am speaking to you right now. I wanted to know, what does all that stuff mean for me? And it basically meant that my body, at the time I was in my early-ish 30s, that my body had a very low reserve of eggs and was not producing eggs. We had a very low reserve. So the chances of me getting pregnant naturally were minimal. So I sat there and it hit me like a ton of bricks, because I was like, what does that mean? That it means I can never carry a child? And I immediately started crying. So she was talking and I'm now crying. And then I'm asking her all these questions. I'm like, so I can never get pregnant? And she said, no, there are options. People do IVF, people get egg donors. And I was like, how much does IVF cost? So my head was just like running, like, okay, there has to be an answer, there has to be a solution. And she told me the cost of IVF, and I'm like, what does an egg donor cost? And she's telling me, and I'm sobbing, and she's telling me all this information. I was in a panic. And then I remember asking her, but who's going to afford that IVF? Who's going to afford the egg donor? Where am I going to get all this money from? And I remember my doctor saying to me, she said, Kambua, I am a doctor and I've been in this field for a long time. And I have seen women with situations like yours, different situations. But I've also seen God do things in people's lives that even I as a doctor cannot explain. So what I'm saying to you is, I'm going to give you options on the possible way forward. But I also want you to know that God can do anything. And she said, you're a woman of faith, Kambua. I want you to remember that the faith you profess can work for you, that God can do it. He can work a miracle. So we're going to do our best, and I'll tell you my options and you go think about it, but still know that God can do anything. And I walked out of her office. I had, my eyes were puffy. I was so confused. I got into my car, called my husband, and he's like, and I'm trying to talk to him, and the tears came again. I'm trying to explain I cannot have children, and it has to be IVF, or it has to be an egg donor, and it has to be blah, blah, blah. And he's like, okay, where are you going? He was working, and he's like, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to the salon. And he's like, why are you going to the salon? Can we meet at home? I think in my confusion, I just needed to go somewhere, a space that could make me feel good. And in that second, I thought, let me go to the salon and do my hair. But he said, meet me at home. I'm coming. So I met him at home. And I remember my drive home, I was thinking, you know what? Since I cannot or can never have children, maybe the best thing to do is to allow my husband to be, because I felt that I was denying him something that I may never be able to give him. And there was so many conversations going through my head in that moment, because I finally knew, it was finally spelled for me in black and white, that you possibly cannot have children naturally. So I got home with a paper that had the results, and I remember my husband looking at it, and then he's like, he read it and he was like, okay, is that it? I said, yes. And he said, okay. And I was like, what do you mean, okay? Do you understand what this means? And he says, yeah, I understand what this means, but I also know what God promised us. And he said, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to take these results and I will keep them in the safe, because one day we'll be able to show people that this is what the medical report said, and this is what God has done. And it hit me like a ton of bricks, because for a moment there, in my panic in getting the results and in processing them and whatever, I had for a moment forgotten that there is a higher being that I have given my life to. I have given God control of my life, and I profess a God who can do anything. Why did I suddenly feel that this situation was too complex for him to fix? So we kept the results in the safe, and we decided to move forward with life joyfully, however and whenever the children came. I remember mentioning the options that I had been given, and my husband said, I strongly feel this is not the direction for us. And he said, it's a viable direction. People have taken it. It has worked for some people, but I really feel this is not the path for us. And I, in that moment, felt a slight level of frustration, but I also accepted it. The period that following that, I realized that, again, I was not in control of my life. I could not control this narrative, how the story ended. I had to fully trust. And I remember making a prayer to God that I said, from where I stand, I do not know if it will happen. I have no idea. It looks darker than it has ever been right now. And I said, God, what I want you to do for me is to give me back my joy, is to give me back my peace, is to give me back fulfillment in life, because my life had so heavily revolved around having children up until this point. And I realized that I was operating from a place that was hurting. I was so broken. I was so disappointed and so discouraged. I had joined dots that were not supposed to be joined. I kept thinking I lost my dad, and then I had a miscarriage, and then I cannot have children. And I was joining all these dots, and it felt like I was just doomed to fail. And I said, help me, God, to stop joining dots that are not supposed to be joined, and to fully trust you. And I think those were some of the best days of my life, because I began to actually feel alive. I began to feel joyful. I began to feel that I was doing everything that I was doing from a place of actually loving being alive. And as difficult as the circumstances was, as much as I still had so many questions from so many people, I had a peace within me. I had the knowledge that I am a complete woman, and that I am not defined by whether or not I am married. I am not defined by whether or not I have children. I am full and I am complete and I am enough. Now, if the husband comes, if the children come, those are a bonus. So I said, well, thank you, God. I'm here. I'm married. I don't have children. I don't know if I'll have children. If they come, and I believe they will come, then that will be a plus. But in this moment, allow me to see myself as complete. And he did. So the journey went on, and all sorts of, a lot of times, unsolicited advice from people who just meant so well. But sometimes our intentions, we use our intentions to justify why we say certain things to people. My intentions were good, sina ubaya. But I would like to encourage you who's watching me. I'd like to encourage you to be cautious, to be kind when dealing with people who are possibly having a difficult journey in their fertility, in their journey to motherhood, to be kind, to be gracious, to mind your business, because we feel entitled to each other's lives. We feel entitled because they're my friends, they're my family. We feel that entitlement, but we shouldn't. We actually shouldn't. And nobody owes you any information concerning whether or not they're trying to have children. Now, if they let you in, that's a completely different story. But I can tell you that I absolutely disliked anybody who walked up to me and tried to rub my belly and said things like, is anything happening there yet? Something is gonna be happening there soon. I hated it so much. It repulsed me because I felt like people were rubbing salt on my wound and it was not helping. I hated feeling as though when I walked into a room, it felt like the barren woman has just walked into the room. I hated questions of how long are you trying? You need to just relax. All of those comments, unsolicited, well-intentioned, some of them, but still they don't justify the kind of pain that they trigger on people who are walking the journey. So part of the reason I want to have this conversation on infertility is because I was on the receiving end of it for so long. It didn't feel good at any given point. It did not feel good. But I remember times just feeling like, I wish somebody would speak for me. I wish somebody would defend me. And I'm so grateful because even when I had numerous battles publicly on social media and so on, there are people there who stood up for me, who spoke for me. But I thought, can we amplify our voices? And sometimes, because people were afraid of getting caught in the crossfire, they would encourage me privately, and I appreciate that too. But there are times I wish that their voices were amplified. So I'm grateful that I had to be in that fiery furnace to get the courage and the boldness to sit here and to speak for you, to speak for that woman who is being kicked out of her marital home because she's unable to have children. I'm so grateful that for the years that we tried having children, which amounted to a total of 7 years, that not at any given point did my parents-in-law or my family, my immediate family, none of them ever once said to me, when are you going to have children? They never raised that question with me. Did I expect them to? Sometimes. I thought, okay, it's been long. The question is probably going to come up anytime now, but it never did. What a privilege it is for me to have had a community like that saw me, saw Kambua, that never made me feel any less valued. But I'm aware that my story is not everybody else's story. I have interacted with women who have been kicked out of their homes. They've been kicked out by their in-laws. They've been kicked out by their partners, their husbands, because they've been unable to have children. And you see, the saddest thing is to come to realize, first of all, 1 in 6 people, 1 in 6 couples, this is a worldwide statistic, will struggle with infertility. And 50% of those cases are in women, which means that 50% are men. And what happens in our society, especially in our African society, is that when a couple is unable to have children, it is automatically blamed on the woman. In our case, I had a problem. But in many cases, it's not the woman who has a problem. And I wish we would talk about these things, because then we would realize that that woman that you kicked out of that boma, she probably was not the problem. Or if she was the problem, maybe she can get help. Infertility is so beyond you. And for any woman who's walking that journey, hear me say, it's not your fault. It's not what you did or didn't do. Because I have received many comments from people over the years, and I will talk about my social media wars and all of that, where people suggested maybe she did this, maybe she did that, maybe when she was young, she aborted. And those comments would tear me apart. So I want to say to any woman, I want to say to any couple that is struggling, it is not your fault. I also want to say to you that you can get help, and the sooner you do it, the better. But I also want to speak to our communities, whether it's your in-laws or your friends or your community at church. I want to speak to us, because we are the ones who make people who are walking through infertility feel as though they are less than we are. We are the people who sit on our high horses, and because we are able to have children so easily, we imagine that that should be the story with everybody else, and so we are less than kind with our words. Here at Being KAMBUA, I want this space to be the place where you get to know that you are seen and you are heard. I want us to have these conversations because I realize that even the costs of, when I talked about IVF and I've talked about egg donors and surrogacy and all these things, which are possible in our society, in our country, but they are so expensive. They're inaccessible to a lot of people who are struggling. What can we do? What can be done, even on a policy level, to ensure that if there are people who need assisted reproduction, then they're not losing everything that they have worked for just to pay for an IVF procedure, just to pay for an egg donor, just to pay for the process of surrogacy? How can we make these things more accessible, more affordable? How can I respect the work that Millie Odhiambo, for instance, has done in just making sure that there's, the surrogacy is regulated in our country, because again, people take advantage of certain things. So we commercialize everything, and surrogacy has been commercialized in our country. How do we ensure that we understand the sanctity of life, but also ensuring that the people who actually need these things can get them in a way that is more considerate of even of our economic times? So thank you for journeying with me. If you're walking this journey of infertility, if something I have said has resonated with you, I'd love to know what that is. See, I'm grateful because this journey has allowed me to interact with people, precious people, who maybe I would not have recognized if my life had turned out differently. I have a community of sisters in organizations like Waiting Wombs who walked with me. We have cried together, we celebrate together because we feel each other's pain deeply. I've met special women in these communities, in the waiting room, and others that are online that helped me realize that I am not alone. And I want to tell you, if you're walking this path, you're not alone. Reach out, go out on your social media. There are groups, there are communities that are ready to walk with you, to make you know that you are not alone. Because a problem half shared is half solved, they say. So let me know if something resonates with you, if you have a story that you want to share with me. And our journeys are so different. For some of you, it could be PCOS, it could be fibroids, it could be all sorts of different things that have brought infertility onto your journey. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear where you're at. I'd love to hear if you're on the other side, and by that I mean, do you have a child? But I also wanted to hear, because when we talk about infertility, we focus so much on the miracle being the miracle baby. And I'm grateful I have a miracle baby. I have miracle babies, which I'll be sharing with you as we go on. But I want to hear the miracle of coming out on the other side, that being that you did not get lost in the darkness, in the depression, in the loneliness. I feel that as Kambua, I came out on the other side when I got that report that said I could not have children, but I stood at a place and said, and I was able to say that I feel joyful, I feel complete, I feel peaceful. I believe that that in itself is a miracle. So I would love to hear your story. Go ahead and share that with me on our social media pages. And as promised, I will be bringing you lots and lots of women and men and specialists who can weigh in on this amazing subject. So thank you for staying with me. Take care and God bless you.
Your cervix has already opened.
Yeah.
There's nothing we could have done. There's nothing we can do. So she looks at me. By now, my husband has not yet arrived. So she looks at me and asks me, Wambui, were you trying to abort? You know, you young people.
Oh.
Because I'm a young, small, pretty girl there.
Oh, no.
I did not even have the energy to answer her. You've struggled to conceive and you're losing that child. Then somebody is insinuating that you are trying to abort. Let's even assume that I was trying to abort. I deserve care. That is your work.
Absolutely. You deserve
care.
care.
Yes, I deserve care. This is not your place for you to judge me.
Yes.